Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Kira Epstein, the co-director at the New School at Commonweal. Today's conversation is the first in a new series we're presenting with Commonweal's Omega Resilience Awards program. Everyone in our community has watched with great interest as this program has developed, finding partners in Africa and India and South America who are doing amazing things to foster resilience as we welcome these wild times. It's been a pleasure to work with the Aura team on these three conversations, including today's conversation with Nnimmo Bassey about his resilience work in Africa. For those of you who haven't been with us before, we'd like to say that the New School at Commonweal is a learning community of dialogue and conversation. We explore how to build more resilience and better stewardship for body, soul, community, and the earth. We produce our conversations and we make them available for thousands of listeners worldwide on YouTube, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. We've been doing this since 2007, and we have more than 400 podcasts available on our media sites, including many other resilience-focused conversations. The second conversation in this series will be May 15th with Manisha Gupta from Startup in India. So I will turn it over to Michael Lerner, Commonweal's president and our host for today's conversation.
Thank you, Kira, and welcome, friends. It's so wonderful to be here with you. And Nnimmo Bassey, such an honor and delight to be back together.
Thank you so much, Michael, for this opportunity to share this space with you and to have a conversation with you. It's been a long time, so I'm really, really very excited about this.
Wonderful. Nnimmo, for those of you who don't know you, you are a Nigerian architect, environmental activist, author, and poet, and the executive director of Mother Earth Foundation. You chaired the Friends of the Earth International board from 2008 to 2012. You received the Alternative Nobel Prize, the Right Livelihood Award in 2010, and you were awarded a very distinguished Norwegian Human Rights Award, the RAFO Prize, in 2012. You have lived in peril for your life at points because of your activism. You spent time living on the run, underground, as it were, and you spent time in prison for your activism. So you know what it's like to put your life at risk for the things you believe in. So with that background, I'd like to start with one of your poems as a poet. Would you read us a poem to start us off?
Oh my God, that to be by surprise. But I have my new collection beside me, so I will gladly read. The book is titled I See the Invisible. So I think it's just appropriate that I should read the title for at this time. I see the invisible. I hear the inaudible. I feel the intangible. I'm everywhere in no time, floating on memories of strange futures. I lofty hopes, sliding on rugged dreams in truncated nights. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, I feel the intangible. My ears on the ground, even as we tremble at the departing footsteps of departed elders at marketplaces. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, I feel the intangible. Eyes on the past, we see the future, cluttered by discarded viruses and many angry relatives. Hands glued to our sides, social distances narrowed to a kilometer apart. I see the invisible, I hear the inaudible, and I feel the intangible. We have never been closer. Now we're apart. Finally, nature's tiny beings shake sleep away. We are relatives and can have a good day if we don't cough or cough in each other's face. This poem was written in the heat of the coronavirus pandemic. And, we just had to learn to see the invisible and to hear the inaudible and feel things that were rather intangible. So that's the first poem. I hope it came true.
Well, that's a beautiful beginning, Nnimmo. And let me stay with that for a moment, because I am personally deeply interested in the invisible, the inaudible, the intangible, that dimension of consciousness that goes beyond what is recognized in materialist science. So when you say that you see the invisible, is this metaphoric, or do you have an experience which is widespread, I know, in spiritual experiences in Africa and really around the world? There are many people who do see the invisible. And so I'm curious whether you mean that you are connected with that realm, or whether we should understand it more metaphorically.
This is the beauty of poetry. A lot of people will take it as a metaphor.
Yeah.
But to me, I believe that if you cannot see the invisible, you can't live a full life. A full life, there are more things that we cannot see than the things that we see with the physical eyes. And so it's just that life that we need to be sensitive to see those things that ordinarily would not see, and to feel the impulses. This is what drives life. This is what gives us the strength to push on, to know we are not alone at any point in time. And so seeing the invisible, to me, is keeping your eyes open even when they are closed. Mm-hmm. Because we don't only see things when we walk with our eyes wide open. As I said, it's my reality, seeing things that are invisible. And it really is almost like when we have you're reading a book, you learn to read between the lines. I mean, that's a very simple way to put it. Because sometimes what is being said, what is not said, could be more meaningful than the things that are being said. But really, what makes life worth living and what really keeps us strong is seeing the invisible, sensing the invisible, and knowing that we're surrounded with relatives. That's why one line in the poem said, we are all relatives. If we have that understanding that we're all related, we're all connected, then we would really know how to live with care and with respect and gratitude. Some years back, I visited one man who passed on, I think last year, Sawadogo, Yakuba Sagodogo. He's written about online. There's a video on him as the man who stopped the desert. I visited him on his forest in Burkina Faso. Then he was showing me, he called me aside and started showing me some trees. But when I looked, I saw only the rocks. I couldn't see any tree. And he started telling me this tree is 2 years old, this one is, I couldn't see anything. Until I looked closely, then I began to see that really between the cracks, there were plants there. As from that time, I learned to walk, metaphorically speaking, without letting my feet touch the ground. Because I don't want to walk on top of trees. I have to respect even the soil that I step on because of many trees that I cannot see with my naked eyes.
Well, this is of the greatest interest to me, and I hope we can return to this subject toward the end, because it is, I agree with you that it's difficult to live a full life if we don't in some way experience the invisible. So let's hope to return to that. But let me start with the situation writ large in Africa and around the world. Clearly, our sense of the global polycrisis is accelerating. The whole concept only really broke through to public awareness about 2 years ago. But since it's broken through, one finds evidence of it everywhere, and nowhere more, one could say, than in Africa, where the combination of drought, famine, displaced people, refugees, 15 different conflicts, the tragedy in the Sudan, much, much more, are all underway. And so we're often aware that the polycrisis, that Africa has been living in polycrisis conditions for a long time, but those conditions are accelerating in Africa as in elsewhere. So I wanted to ask you at the start how you hold with your vision and perception of wholes as well as parts, how you hold the reality of the polycrisis in Africa.
Well, you've really captured it so clearly, vividly. It's a very tragic situation when we look at what is unfolding around us and the desperation that is being created by the polycrisis. People have many times what is really going on is not out there in the media. And so you wouldn't even, a lot of people don't know what is the extent of the crisis. And they're all interconnected, interrelated, and they go back in history. These are not things that just suddenly happened. They are things that have roots in history. You know, if you go back to slavery, to colonialism, to the current system of where individualism has become the almost like the banner of achievement. When people are not connected to the next person, people don't care what happens in the next community. Everyone for himself or for herself. And so it's getting really, really more complicated. We're having some communities that you could more or less say these people are never going to have peace. It's because they are endowed with nature's gifts. Communities in Congo Democratic Republic, where you have the multiplicity of all kinds of minerals, critical minerals for renewable energy, gold, silver, diamond, you name it. And so because of the richness, the people are forced to live in poverty. This is a contradiction of life. People are poor because they are so rich. This is really terrible. And then, of course, the climate crisis, which is one of the key manifestations of the polycrisis. Africa is known to be contributing very little to the store of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, but the impacts are incredibly tough. Desertification, droughts, and floods when the rain fall, real heavy floods. We're having, for example, in West Africa, we're having pressure in the Sahel, driving migration downwards to the forest area, and then sea level rise and coastal erosion and industrial pollution in the Gulf of Guinea is pushing communities upwards from the south. And so you are bound to have conflict in the Sahelian region. And so, it's all a lot of factors working together. And the world is just moving on. The world is not, when there's international gathering discussing aspects of the problem like climate change, rather than tackle the issues and provide what is needed, there's the cooperation that is needed to tackle the issue and build resilience. We are seeing very fake and false solutions where people are speculating on carbon, giving different labels, blue carbon, all kinds of carbon, valuable carbon, invaluable, so just to speculate and make profit out of the misery of people. I just hope that the world will wake up to again see the sense that we are all connected. Building walls, building immigration barriers will never solve the problem. We're in this boat, to use that image, together. And the sooner we understand this and appreciate that, the more we'll share and work together in solidarity. And of course, solidarity is love in action. So we cannot just speak about it, we have to show it by expressing that love in real, tangible ways.
I so agree with that. The project that brought us back together recently is our collaboration on the Omega Resilience Awards, which is seeking to raise up the voices of younger leaders in the global South about strategies for resilience in the face of the poly crisis. And your organization, the Health of Mother Earth Foundation, is the genesis and root hub of our work in Africa. And you've brought together an extraordinary first cohort of young leaders, and now, as I understand, are selecting a second cohort. What have you learned so far with your colleagues from this work, and what, if any, has the impact of undertaking this with us been for your work in Africa?
I would say, Michael, that we are very fortunate to be working together in the Omega Resilience Awards. And anchoring the work in Africa is a very special privilege for us. And I should also say that at the beginning, I was quite anxious about how everything was going to unfold. We weren't sure which candidates we're going to get and what they're going to bring to the table, or whether they will really do anything that will be meaningful and have real impact in the struggle to unpack the poly crisis, to understand the various dimensions, and to give people hope to do something that can help people to cope with the situation. But, right from the first meeting we had when I visited Commonweal campus, that itself was an experience to me. I could see the serenity of the environment, the solidarity, the comradeship, seeing the other partners from Latin America, from India, and then, of course, the environment itself. I just see the history behind it. And so eventually, with the cohort that we had, there's been a lot of learning process. And I like the process, the way the whole cohort, the whole fellowship is being run, that is flexible, but at the same time, there's constant backstopping and checking what is going on. Constant calls to the fellows, sharing of ideas of what their practice is. And so we had 7 fellows from Africa, and we had the opportunity of learning from other fellows and cohorts in India and Latin America. But from the from the African cohort, I would say that it's particularly very enchanting to see the 7 young people that we ended up with. One working on understanding eco-anxieties, the kind of anxiety that's coming from climate change, from ecological devastation around us, really understanding it from the human, I would say the spirit, understanding the impacts on people, some things that are not spoken, that people just feel and they can't lay a finger on it. And so having to bring that up and unpack it in the African context, very, very interesting. Then another fellow that approached the work from the urban design. Sometimes we think that our cities are neutral, spatial configurations. But when you go back in time, you find that some of the designers of our cities have had very peculiar reasons for doing what they did. Putting different classes, dividing people into classes, putting in different places, putting factories where they ought not to put them, in the middle of where people are living, giving very little space to the majority of the people, and then bigger space for those who have the means, so to speak. And so just say that this itself affects the way people respond to the poly crisis and how much harder they have to struggle to help one another. We have others looking at from the gender perspective, the stories and media, and all this as, just looking at the diversity of our approaches itself helps me as a person to further understand the multiplicity of the challenges and the different ways of handling them, especially the issue of well-being and wellness. But difficult work of working with communities who are facing serious challenges, there are also impacts on us as activists. And that as we take care, work with people to recover, we also have to think about our own wellness, our own well-being, and ensure that we have a balance, the way we relate with everything around us. So it's been a big, big blessing, I would say. And we're grateful to work with such innovative young people. And we can't wait. We're just in the process of selecting the second cohort. And I am very excited about what is going to come.
Thank you, Nnimmo. Parallel in my life is that I've been leading groups of cancer patients for the last almost 40 years. And we just finished our 222nd week-long retreat for cancer patients. And you might think that after having, lived for over 4 full years with small groups of people with cancer, again, 8 people at a time, that it would get old or repetitive. But I find that with each new cohort, I learn something. Each time a new group comes together, there are things that I learn that they give me new reflections. And one of the things that at 80 years of age that I'm most grateful for is that the opportunities to learn in no way cease or diminish with age. In fact, they get richer. So you're not as old as I am. I think you're about 65 now, if I've got it right. As you sit with this new cohort of young people, mostly young people that you've brought together, what are you learning personally that you didn't necessarily expect to learn from the experience?
That's a very interesting question. I think one of the what has helped me over time is that I've always kept an open mind, ready to learn and to experience what comes along. And I'm really amazed that you've carried out over 200 retreats with cancer patients, over 220, more than that. Yeah. That is enormous. That in itself, that is a big challenge. And you haven't given up. So, yeah, so when I sit with the young people, for example, we had a first in-person meeting in Nairobi a couple of months ago. And that was very interesting to see them in one space and to get to see them when they're relaxed, when they're having fun, and again, when they talk about what they've been doing. And so you get to see what I learned and what confirms to me that the big changes we're going to see in this world would always be carried out by ordinary people.
Yes.
Not anybody like a superhuman. Right. Ordinary people just having the right impetus, the right atmosphere, and having the right ears listening to them and kind of affirming their approaches and work. This has been the beauty of the Omega Resilience Fellowship, because there's no dictation to any of the fellows on what they should do. They all come up the things from the innermost being, the things that drives them, that they're interested in. And, it kind of affirms me and encourages me to just understand that for me as a person, I must continue to do what is meaningful to me, no matter who says what anybody else thinks about it. As long as that thing makes sense to me, it's meaningful to me, and I'm convinced that it helps to make life better for the next person to me, I just love it. And I like the fact that they spend a lot of time on their own. I personally enjoy times of introspection, times of being alone. But the problem is that sometimes I'm being alone looking at problems. I like to be alone to look at beauty, something beautiful. And just say, oh my goodness, this is really nice. And just get myself lost in the middle of all that. That the whole work is very self-affirming. And I'm just so grateful about it all.
Nnimmo, I'd love to turn now. You and I've had a chance to talk about this privately on a walk at Commonweal, but I'd love to just reflect a little bit on your life journey. Remind us, where were you born? Were you born in a city or a village or what?
No. I was not born I was born in a village. If you get to I describe how to get to my village. When you come to Nigeria, aim for the end of the world. Then when you get to the end of the world, turn left. Then you get to my village. I'm from
And what kind of family were you born into?
My village is a very unique setting. So the whole setting set on a very hilly terrain with very beautiful valleys around us, very green all year round. And the air is very clean. And we fetch our waters from the streams. And the streams at that time were very pristine, very clean and cool. Now, I was born into a family of 7, and I happened to be the last. So I had 5 brothers and 1 sister. And my parents were both farmers and entrepreneurs at the same time. And so my mother would farm, my dad would farm, and they were also traders, trading in the things that others. My father traded palm oil, not crude oil. And then, my mother was taking care of selling domestic things that women needed to take care of the family. So it was it's always been, even now, still very close-knit. I'm still very close to my brothers and my sister. And it's a family that my parents are, of course, they've left, they traveled before, as should be the case. Parents should always travel before their children. So they've gone on their journey. And so it's been a very interesting. I had a very interesting upbringing in the village, and I never left. I think the first time I left the village for a sustained period was during the Nigerian Civil War, when we simply had to live as refugees because of the conflict, because the war was fought both in the cities and in the villages, and that displaced us for about. I think that took me and my parents out of the village for about 3 years. So that we have only returned after the war, and that had a very serious impact on my childhood, on my growing up, because I could see massive human rights abuses as a child. I could see people being maltreated, people losing their lives. I could see rejection. When you go as a refugee to another village trying to find shelter, and you are simply driven away because it's said that you're going to bring the enemy. But I had a very supportive family, and I have very fond memories of the unit itself.
And so how did you make your way from that, original village life and then the disruption of the war? How did you make your way up to studying architecture? I mean, that seems like a very challenging path to get there. How did you manage to do that?
You're right. It's very challenging path. If I even completing because of the disruption of my primary education, I had a lot of catching up to do as I went to high school. Because a lot of things where I didn't have the opportunity of learning such things. But I was quite curious even as a child, and I loved buildings. I loved art. There was art everywhere around. So you could see decorations, you could see buildings and different things. And I guess my dad thought I would be a decorator, but that eventually wasn't my calling or my direction. So I decided to be an architect. And I found that after doing that, I wasn't going to be an architect for buildings for long, but architect of human lives, constructing lives and just be working to be sure that people have the environment that allows them to be who they ought to be and to live their life to the full. So I can't really explain it, but that's what it was. And I practiced as an architect in the public service for 9 years, 8 months, set up private practice. I got married to my wife is an architect, so she still runs that practice. And so you could say, well, I still look at what is going on in that sector, but it's a profession that is so good and interesting, but it gave me the space to learn about so many other things, the social aspects of life. And I was very interested in social architecture, designing buildings that people could afford, and also things that the spaces, there are no spaces, influence behavior, buildings influence behavior. How do you democratize the spaces around us? And how do you make spaces that are inviting, that makes people, become relaxed and not tensed up, and really then release their own potentials?
You've written, I think, about a dozen books, and I'll just read a few of the titles. One of your early books of poems was called Patriots and Cockroaches in 1992. Then your second book in this list was Beyond Simple Lines, The Architecture of Chief G.Y. Aduku and Archcon in 93, The Management of Construction in 94, another book of poems on the run in 94. And then in 97, Oil Watching in South America, another book of poems. And then in 2002, We Thought It Was Oil, But It Was Blood, a book of poems. Then a piece on genetically modified organisms in 2004, and then Living Houses, Architecture in 2005, Knee Deep in Crude Oil, obviously 2009, and the Nigerian Environment and the Rule of Law. More books of poems, and so on. So you've led this life where poetry, architecture, concern for a living environment, deep activism, confronting some of the most powerful oil companies in the world, perhaps notably Royal Dutch Shell, which we had some experience with as well here in the United States. How did you hold these different pieces of your identity and your work? Did they sort of come together piece by piece, or was there some coherent vision of how you held these parts of yourself as a poet, an architect, an activist, and someone just simply trying to make your way with your family?
That's an interesting question. It's something I've thought about a couple of times. And, the architecture, poetry, and environmental activism are very much interwoven in the sense that architecture to me is like poetry is stone, while the normal poems we read about write on books, and we use words. And we even use words to construct houses. My poems have been very much in tune with my activism. Some have been like chronicles of my experiences, and some have been tools for campaigns, for actions. And so my poetry has never been neutral. They've been aimed for. The first collection, Patriots and Cockroaches, was a sense my trying to understand the political and social environment in Africa. At that time, we still had the remains of colonialism. Some countries were still not free. But we had sit-tight rulers, lifelong presidents who never wanted to leave office. So those were like the so-called patriots. And then the people who were suffering all across the continents were almost like cockroaches who were just picking the crumbs. Poems like the poetry, Poems on the Run, of course, was all written at a time when I had been declared wanted by the military government for activism, campaigns on human rights and environmental rights and against military dictatorship. And so while I was underground for about 4 months, during that period, to keep myself, make sure I kept interrogating what was going on, that collection came to be. And that was a very dramatic period. But then after that, I got arrested, of course. And there was a time in my life when going to the airport to present my passport to travel, or when I come back from a trip, I was never really sure whether I would make that trip or whether I'll make my way home. And so that, like the collection called Intercepted, were all written while in detention. And all that was the offense. There was no charge for being arrested and detained. It was just an intercepted person, and it was so brazen under the military rule. But then being an activist under military dictatorship was quite easy because you knew who you were fighting against, and you knew what you stood for and what you would not accept. But in 1999, Nigeria became a democracy, civilian democracy. But then we had no experience at all as activists how to deal with politicians. So we really had to sit back and learn how to deal with a situation where those in power were not in military uniform. Because those in power a number of them were ex-military officers. It was still the same, but in different context. So yes, my architecture, my poetry and activism, to a large extent interconnected, while at the same time being open, but then responsive to what was going around me.
After you were underground and after you were arrested, my memory is that what you thought you needed to do was to get in contact with your wife so she could begin to bring your friends together to work for your release. Am I remembering that right?
Absolutely. My wife was very, very pivotal to my safety. And because all I needed to do whenever I got arrested was to get a message out to her that, look.
And did you feel that your life was in danger once you were arrested?
Absolutely. In those days, people were arrested. If nobody knew that you were arrested to start with, nobody may ever know where you are. Yeah. And before my very first detention, I read the book A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela, and that book helped me a lot. The one part of the book said that the man who locks you up is not really your enemy. He just do a job that he's been asked to do. So don't antagonize him. It's a system that is putting you in prison, not the poor man that's turning the key. With that knowledge, I always made sure that the last guy to turn the lock became my friend. And what they would always agree to take a piece of paper out and give to somebody who would send a message. We didn't have mobile phones, so it wasn't so easy sending messages, but you had to find somebody who could find a way to pass the messages, and those were extremely helpful. Yeah, so my wife, I give her the credit. She was very strong. And, when I was underground, she had to be underground also. That time we had 2 young children, and we had to move in different directions. And in fact, when the military got to my house looking for me, I had already left, but they met my brother-in-law, and he was bold to tell us, I'm not the one you're looking for. They said, what's your name? When he told them his name, they said, we're looking for you also. So they got him, and he was in prison, ended up being in prison for 3 months, but here we are today, we can tell the story. And, we learned a lot of lessons from the whole complex situation.
What were conditions like in prison?
Okay. The very first day I was, I think maybe what the problem was congestion. As an architect, I could size up how many people would be in that particular block I was taken to. And the block was designed for 12 people. I was number 87 the day I was put in there. Sometimes we're up to 120 persons in a cell, a block designed for 12 people. And, it was really tough. It was tough. But then we learned, you have to learn how to survive in that kind of situation.
What was it inside you in the most difficult conditions that you turned to sustain yourself? What was the inner source in you that you turned to sustain yourself in the most difficult times?
I think that is my spirituality. So I'm able to know who I am, where I'm in the scheme of things, to know that people could do whatever. Nobody could really touch your soul or your spirit. That is way beyond the reach of any man. and with that knowledge and that conviction, I'm believing in God. I could. It's easier to face a lot of challenges when you have that kind of anchor that holds you steady, even in the midst of the storm. It's very difficult if you're just floating and believing that things happen by chance. I think many things that happen around us don't really happen by chance. There are things that teach us very invaluable lessons. So that even in the most difficult situation, we have to learn from that situation. And my belief also in the human person and people around me has always also been very helpful. That people would always, there's more love inside of a human being than hate. There's more yearning for solidarity, for togetherness, than for separateness. This is why people find life very difficult when they become too individualistic. But when people, I believe, inborn in people to come together in community, community is extremely important. When there's community, there's resilience and there's strength to withstand the difficulties in life, no matter what that difficulty may be, and no matter the source.
How would you describe your spirituality? What form does it take?
How do I describe that? The simplest way for me to describe my spirit, I'm a Christian.
Okay.
And so that basically anchors everything. I believe that God has the best thoughts for me, thoughts of good, not of evil, and with the direction of the Spirit, I can get to my destination. And so I do spend a lot of time, studying the Word, the Bible. I spend a lot of time also learning to apply the lessons from it. If I pick up my phone, the app will tell me, the first app you always open is this, and it takes me to the Bible, So some days when I feel like reading the Bible in the morning, my app will say, look, this is the app you normally opens your day with. So what are you doing, more or less? That's more or less what the app is telling me. But, but I do believe that spirituality is never completed alone. I don't believe that my journey is a soul runner, that I'm running on a private race. I believe that our spirituality must be connected to that of others. As I said, that community is vital, and that is the body that really brings to solid practice and experience what we are spiritually.
And so when you spoke earlier in your beautiful poem about seeing what is invisible, hearing what is inaudible, touching what is intangible, is there a connection between that capacity to see the invisible and hear the inaudible and your sense of guidance from spirit? In other words, does the guidance appear? It's one thing to be Christian and to live by Christian moral codes and all the wonderful things that go with that, but it's quite another thing to have a sense of connection to spirit that is a living communication from the invisible. Is that part of your spirituality?
Yes, my spirituality informs me and is real to me in the sense that the things I hope for, the things that I don't see are more real than the things I see.
Yes.
They're much more real, are more valid than the things I see, more numerous. And, so it leaves me with that sense of calmness and that sense of awe at the same time. Mm-hmm. That we are in the, just like looking at the earth as a speck in the universe or universes, floating, just one small speck floating about, and then we are all here. It gives you that sense that, look, you couldn't just be a speck here for nothing. You have to understand that you are not just floating on planet Earth, that you are here for a purpose. And understanding that purpose of what is very critical. And to me, learning to see the invisible means seeing the good in every person. Seeing the possibilities in other lives, in other beings, in the trees, in the animals, saying that we're all contributing to each other's well-being. In one of my practical experiences or activities as a Christian is spending fellowship with people who have suffered from leprosy. Leprosy is a disease that destroys the limbs, destroys the sense of feeling for those who are patients. And the treatment it's a bacteria that causes it. And it's very easy to treat. But some people don't know they have that problem until it's too late, until they're deformed. So you still have a few of such people around. And quite regularly, I just spend some time with them and seeing the joy that these people who don't have hands, some of them can't see anything, they don't have nostrils, their eyes are blind, and they are despised and rejected. Spending time with such people really grounds me in the reality of what life is about. That, the circumstances of life may be very hard, very tough. People may reject you, despise you, but the inner joy, the life that's beyond what we see is what really keeps such people and should keep us also active and doing the good that we can do as much as is possible.
When did you first awaken to a sense of being guided by spirit? How old were you when you began to see a life for yourself that wasn't necessarily what your parents had expected?
I think that is, it's very difficult to lay my hands on that. But, the time of my clearest awareness, I was already in my 30s. So I lived a fairly carefree life, doing just having a good time generally. And, being as, presenting different imaginations and things. But then I realized that, look, life is much more than this, and that we can't do everything just anywhere we like it. That it's got to be a time where we sit down and talk to ourselves. Having that conversation with myself is very important. And I think it's one of the things that many people don't do. Just sitting down and talking to yourself. I like to talk to myself at times and just review the things around me.
Nnimmo, both you and I have spent a good deal of our lives trying to make the world and our countries safe from toxic chemicals. And you have been in the forefront of that. And of course, Nigeria has been one of the most affected countries in the world by the multinational oil companies, Royal Dutch Shell being a particular one. I ended up having a quite direct encounter with Royal Dutch Shell trying to move a Black community away from a Shell chemical plant and refinery in Norco, Louisiana, for which Margie Richards ultimately won the Goldman Environmental Award for her work there. And we were strongly there in support of Margie Richards. And so I had a very direct experience of Royal Dutch Shell International and its U.S. affiliate, and we worked on that for 2 or 3 years. So I'm very aware of how challenging the oil companies have been in Nigeria. When did you move specifically into oil activism, and what took you on that very dangerous trajectory?
Well, in the early 1990s, from late 1980s to early 1990s, I was in mainstream human rights movement in Nigeria, and of course the pro-democracy movement in Nigeria. But I found that one of the things we're campaigning for better prison conditions. We're campaigning for the right for people to fair hearing and all those. The children should not be in prison. But at the same time, I realized that whole communities were being poisoned by oil spills, gas flares, and then communities would be attacked by the military, by security forces on behalf of the oil corporations. And that was also the time when Ken Saro-Wiwa was leading the movement for the survival of Ogoni people. He eventually got arrested and executed in 1995 of charges, himself and 8 other Ogoni leaders. But it was his activism, especially, that specifically really drew me into environmental justice campaigns. One of the incidents then was there was a community called Umwechen. There was a community in the Ogoni area that called for dialogue. And this was one of the things that always led to conflict. Communities to call for dialogue with the oil companies, and rather than sit down with the communities to discuss how to handle the situation, they would send in the military. And they would burn down communities, kill people, and they were never held to account. And so that the level of environmental degradation, the writings of Ken Saro-Wiwa, and the activism of the Ogoni people were the things that really showed me that, look, this has to be a lifelong commitment, that it wasn't a thing that you do and then move away from. And since then, I co-founded the Environmental Rights Action, which is the Friends of the Earth chapter in Nigeria, and led that for 2 decades. And we've been up till now, we're still working with communities that are being challenged by this kind of situation. And still, as we speak, the entire region is militarized. And so there are some locations you don't have easy access to. In fact, the crime scenes are more protected than places where people need protection. And when I say crimes, I mean where the oil spills, the gas flare points, there are over 170 gas furnaces across the Niger Delta, releasing millions of tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and other toxic elements on a daily basis, some of them in the middle of communities. So campaigning with communities to expose the crimes, to litigate against these corporations, and generally to ensure that they don't push anything under the carpet, that has been the struggle, and it's not ending anytime soon.
Yes. You and I both know that people who speak as truthfully as you do in many parts of the world find themselves in physical danger. Obviously, you've been in physical danger when you had to go underground and when you were imprisoned. What gives you the ability to speak honestly and freely now without a concern that you may put yourself and your family in danger?
There's some jobs that things that you just do because you know it's the right thing to do. And so that one, my family has always been very supportive. So that made it a lot easy for me. And it's, when you see how much suffering communities are going through and how much other beings are suffering along with communities, the destruction of ecosystems, personal comfort becomes less paramount when you know that you are just one individual, but you could do something that could assist others. I think it's just that kind of commitment that we know that we are not here for ourselves. So we don't so much enlarge and elevate our comfort. I mean, I read the last writings of Ken Saro-Wiwa while he was in prison before he was executed. He said he had lived for some years. It was about, I think it was 56 or thereabout at that time. He said I've lived a charming life. But if I have some more years, maybe some more books I would write. Otherwise, I mean, he had done what he needed to do. And the only regret he had, one of the regrets he had, was that he didn't do enough to raise leadership that would take over from him. And he wrote that down in a letter he wrote to a Reverend sister in Ireland, who he was corresponding with while he was in detention. So that, to me, captures also my inspiration and makes me know that, look, it's not about me. I just happen to be an instrument to lead and work with others. It's about the community, it's about the people, it's about other beings that we both the ones who see and the ones who don't see. It's about the poor fishes and the other species that are being trashed on a daily basis.
Well, that's a very powerful. I'm just very moved by being in conversation with you always. Agnes Olu wrote. This is Agnes Olu Ora, a fellow. I may be mispronouncing her name. I apologize if I do. A question to Nnimmo. Your involvement has been quite intense from the time you began the struggle in the world of polycrisis to date. You are a family man. When you started, didn't you mind the welfare of your family, especially of your wife and children? And in what way has your struggle to have a better world affected your family? Do you regret it? What are you doing differently to compensate for the time you were not available for your family?
Wow, Agnes, thank you for that question. And thanks for the work you're doing in Kenya. Agnes is one of our star fellows doing great work. as a fellow working from Kenya. And, the question about how do I compensate, that's the major challenge I face in my activism, because it has meant being away from home for a long time, not being available for my children. So it's been a very painful experience for me. And now my kids are all grown up. The youngest is 25 years. It's now time that over the past few years, I've been working overtime, trying to bond with them to cover for the time lost. So it's not been easy at all. With my wife, I think we've managed fairly well. Wherever I am, we're always in touch. In fact, if I'm traveling within the country, outside the country, almost every step I take, I have to send a message. This is where I am at this time. It's something I learned in those very difficult days, and we still do it now, so that we know at any point in time where we are. But with the children too, it's getting better. Agnes, I know you're praying for me, but to really convince me that it's working. My youngest son works directly with me, and he's handling the youth activities and multimedia issues, and he is clearly coming. We're coming closer together, since we're together almost every day now. So yes, that was one challenge, the family challenge. But my wife is a very strong personality, and I know. I wouldn't want to leave the whole burden of taking care of the children, family to her, but I would say that she could do it whether I'm there or not.
Wonderful. We have two questions from our staff, Susan Greylock-Usum and Mark Valentine. Susan wrote, "What are some of the new narratives you are seeing in Africa, narratives that show promise for the creation of a better future?" And Mark wrote, piggybacking on that, "What do narratives around resilience look like in sub-Saharan Africa? What is your dream for a resilient Africa?"
Interesting questions, interesting, difficult questions. But I am a firm believer that narratives are extremely important in understanding the polycrisis and in bringing a sense of people making peace with nature. This is what the narrative, to me, that's the anchor of the narrative that helps us understand how to deal with the polycrisis in our context. We simply have to learn to make peace with nature, to go back to our vibrant tradition, cultures, to see how, because the challenge for us in Africa is about rampant exploitation and oppression. But what that means, when you're in a context where there's rampant exploitation and oppression, the necessary result has to be resistance. And it's not resistance to maybe violent resistance to fight, but resistance that leads to transformation and progress. To see the challenges as the fuel for progress. Because really, if you don't have resistance, you can't move forward. And so overcoming resistance helps us to propel us forward. And the narrative that I believe, the narrative for understanding polycrisis is that this continent that is so rich and so well endowed, not just with nature's gifts and resources, but also with very clear imagination and stories of heroism, stories of faith, stories of the future that we want. These, to me, are the planks for rewiring, retuning, fine-tuning the narrative to tell the stories from our perspective and to encourage ourselves to see also the intersectionality between the struggles and the fact that, as I said earlier to Michael, that we're all relatives. Coming with that is the African concept of Ubuntu, about our lives being connected, also about, in my language is ETUM, which means the good life. The good life is not about how much you've accumulated. It's about how your life affects the next person positively. And so I was just in conversation with colleagues yesterday and today, and we agreed that we need to construct new languages. We need to find new words to describe our dreams and to shape our future. Because there's some words that are so bastardized and so worn out that we need to build new terminologies. And this means a lot of dreaming. We have to dream the future, dream the world to that future, and construct that from my imaginations.
Wonderful, Nnimmo. We have two more questions. One addressed to me from Agnes, and one actually two now, Odudu Bassey and Prezomu. So the one to me from Agnes, I'll try to be brief. Thanks for your selfless hard work to leave the world a better place. What has been your motivation toward changing the world? And you know, Agnes, I think I share with Nnimmo the fact that comes to me from my spirit life. That's where it comes from, and I've felt guided at least from age 30 to age 80 for the last 50 years. But I think the guidance actually began earlier. I think it began very early. And in retrospect, I've felt guided from early childhood on. So I've just had a sense of, again, of being blessed with a grace that I didn't in any way especially deserve. But whatever you call the force of the universe, whether you call it God or source or anything else, I think that somebody or something decided that this radically imperfect human being could be useful. And that's been my goal, that, you know, I'm a very imperfect, radically imperfect human being, but I discovered that I could be useful. And so that has guided me, the sense that at any point, whatever I need to know and the people I need to work with show up, and it feels like grace to be able to participate, and deep grace at 80 years of age to still be able to be useful to the work in new ways, because the task at 80 is different from the task at 50 or 40. So and now it is more to accompany and to support the work of younger people. So that's for me. And now let's go to these two beautiful questions for Nnimmo from Odudu Bassey. Thank you very much, our living ancestor. Nnimmo, I love that line, our living ancestor. In your struggle, I want to believe there were some strategies you implemented which you discovered didn't work. Can you share some examples? And what strategies do you recommend to young activists? And I'll also read you the second one. I'm Prezomo from Nigeria. I have a question for Nnimmo. How critical is spirituality in doing a work as noble as what you do, i.e. environmentalism? So those are two linked, beautiful questions. Nnimmo?
Wow, thank you for the questions, Odudu Bassey. Calling me living ancestor. The young people in Nigeria, and in fact, increasingly across Africa, do call me the living ancestor. So I think that's an honor to be a living ancestor. And it does mean that ancestors are not only those who are dead. And in fact, they are not dead, they just left, they just traveled. So we still hear their footsteps, we still feel their impulses. And so they have to see the living personations of this personification of the ancestors. So I take that as a big honor and privilege. Of course, there are things I did as a younger activist that didn't work, and I learned from that. One of the key things I learned was that when you get to communities, never assume that you know everything. There were times we would go to people having difficulties, communities that are being polluted or challenged, and then we just think that we know the answers. You know, these are the things we want to do. But now, for the past decade or so, what I do is encourage people around me to sit down and listen. So we have we devise different programs like one called Learning from the Wise, And these are knowledge and wisdom holders. So we learn to quietly sit with them, sit at their feet and listen and just pick things from them so that we can correct ourselves and reshape our strategies. Just learning from communities and learning from fence-line communities has been very instructive for me. And I just think that everyone needs to be humble enough to know that we don't know everything. And that those we think don't have the answers may be the very persons who have the answers. If I should leave it at that, let me answer Praise Omu's question. Praise, spirituality is extremely important in the work, in any work that anyone does. We are not one-dimensional beings. We're not. We are multidimensional. We have our bodies, we have our soul, we have our spirit, man, and the spirit speaks to the spirit. The flesh looks for there are a lot of things that the flesh wants that are not really as substantial as what the spirit wants. That's why when somebody sleeps or passes on, we say the person has gone. The issue of spirituality makes you understand what it means to live in a physical plane and to be a spiritual person. It helps you as an activist or whatever else you do to know that there is more to our actions and relationships than what meets the eye. I don't know how better to put it, but I just believe that to be truly resilient and to stand in the face of challenges and horrors that we have to confront every day, you have to be more than just a physical man.
Thank you, Nnimmo. Nnimmo, as we enter the last part of this conversation, is there any subject that you'd like to comment on that we haven't asked you about? Is there something that you feel is missing in what I have found to be just a very deep and beautiful exchange?
Quite a range of issues, but maybe I could just emphasize something. The fact that we tend to, people are so afraid of being inconvenienced. People just want convenience all the time. There are two things in the world that I believe is driving people in the wrong direction. One is greed, wanting more than what you need, or wanting the sense of grabbing, which is what extractivism is all about. The sense that you can grab as much as you can because you have the power and because you can do it without having to give account. We're facing a public crisis around us, even in artificial intelligence crisis looming at the corner. And, people think that a lot of people don't want to imagine a life that is different from what they are enjoying today. People want to utilize the maximum amount of energy. And they talk about energy for power, not spiritual energy. And people want to get everything by just pressing a button. People don't want to do anything, want to just have everything very convenient. And there's a lot of advertisement about this. You buy something today, tomorrow another version comes out, you want to grab that, you just keep accumulating. I think we need to learn to ask the hard question. What is life all about? Is it about what you acquire or about how easy it is for you to intimidate others, to exploit others, to accumulate capital, accumulate power? Must you always be at the front? Can't you be in the crowd and help to make things change from within that mass of people? Why must you stand apart alone all the time? I think these are some of the questions generally that we just need to ask ourselves. Convenience and greed, individualism. I think these are big things that everyone has to learn to overcome, except we want to move in the wrong direction, the other direction.
Yes, it's convenience and greed, or as you said, the belief that we're here for a purpose and that we're not here just for ourselves, and that there is some greater design that we're a part of, however we understand that sense of greater design. Nnimmo, I can't tell you how grateful and honored I feel I feel just a really deep sense of brotherhood with you, and just a deep sense of gratefulness that the universe brought us back together at this point. I wondered if, as we close, you would help us close with one more of your poems.
Well, that's another. Thank you. I could do that. I would like to. I'll happily do that, and I thank you for giving me that opportunity. Having this conversation with you is a highlight for me, and I'm going to mark today. I've always enjoyed working with you. I remember when we were on the GGF board. Each time you made a statement, it had to get me thinking about many things. And just going back together is such a big blessing for me. And thank you for having this conversation with me today. So I'm going to read one poem from the same collection, I See the Invisible, and it's called Becoming Clearer. It's a poem that talks about getting older. Becoming clearer. As I get older, it becomes clearer. The things I don't know outnumber the things I know. As I get older, it becomes clearer. The things I can't fathom outweigh the things I've known. As I get older, it becomes clearer. The lights I haven't seen outshine the ones I've seen. As I get older, it becomes clearer. The sounds I haven't heard outplay the ones I've heard. As I get older, it becomes clearer. The places I haven't been outlast the places I can see. As I get older, it becomes clearer. The tales yet untold outclass those that can be told. As I get older, it becomes clearer that we can go anywhere and not get lost in the labyrinth of our mind.
Thank you, Nnimmo. We have a final question here. I'll just respond briefly from Nnimmo Bassey. She thanks me and says, I have a question about finding support for the work. As a young person, we do need to survive. How can young people find support and funding for activism? And, Nnimmo Bassey, that, first of all, that's a profound question. Secondly, I suspect that in your engagement with Nnimmo and your colleagues, and also with our staff at Aura, that's an active question that we all are thinking about and seeking to guide resources where we can. I do have one comment, which is that when you have a chance to develop a livelihood that does not depend on grants or activism, but rather that you have a way of making a living that you can pursue and participate in activism at the same time, I often find that as a more stable form of livelihood than grants, which are forever appearing and disappearing, and we can't count on them. So in as much as I can say anything to you, I would myself explore a way of living that was not grant dependent in order to assure myself that throughout my life I could make contributions to human welfare and environmental welfare without necessarily finding more grant support. Nnimmo, what would you say in response to that question?
I found it easy personally to expand my work as an activist because I was also an architect at the same time. Although there was a time that some people said they wouldn't give me any job because they don't know whether I would be in prison or not. And then I would not be able to finish that project. So that was funny, but also very interesting. So yes, I also used to say that young people shouldn't seek to make a career as of being an activist. But I guess if you're called to be one, you can't help it. You just have to do that.
Right.
And so yes, the funding is good, but it's never the number one thing. It's much more, I think, more critical to find support in others who believe in what you believe in and who are ready to work with you. As the saying goes, you want to go far, go with someone. If you just want to go fast, then go alone and perhaps with money. I want to go far in the long run.
Wonderful. Well, Nnimmo Bassey, I want to thank you again for this conversation, for your work, for being at the hub and the heart of our work in Africa. And I just find it inspiring each time that we have a chance to be in conversation together. So thank you for your time today and for all your great work with the Omega Resilience Awards.
Thank you so much. We look forward to more collaborations and more work going forward.
Thank you. Kira, over to you.
Thank you, Michael and Nnimmo. Such an honor to have you here with us. Thanks, everyone, for joining us and for being here, taking the time to be with us. We'll see you next time.
Don't take it, 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 don't take it,